are the size I want to do the things I want to do. But it's frightening, and it's unsettling. And so I want to give you that encouragement that I think God is asking us, begging us, making us trust God more. Now I have to tell you, the math doesn't make sense on this, because we know that as our congregations have fewer people in them, we have less resources and we have less people to do the work. And so how are we going to continue? And the truth is, I don't know. But I feel really confident that the congregations that are deepening spiritually, right? 7 people, 12 people, 40 people, the people who are reimagining what it is to love Jesus in a time that surprises us and is different than we expect, those congregations are finding vitality. It looks different than it used to. They may not have Sunday school. They may not have a second pastor. They may not have a full-time pastor. But the congregations who are becoming more in love with Jesus and being deeper into the discipling process are finding hope. Now, some of you might be in congregations where you're like, we do not have that. Do not despair. You have it. Other people around you have it. And remember, at the end of Jesus' ministry, he was down to 11 disciples. And they changed the world. So I want to tell you that my observation of the church these days is that faithfulness is what God is calling us to. And as our nation and our world moves farther and farther into division, potential violence, hatred, the church has something to say about those things. Christians know what it is in our DNA to love in times of trial. Because we follow Jesus, who loved in times of trial. And so to me, the state of the church is one of anxiety and fear and lack and conflict because of all of this. And God is calling us to be honest about that. And then trust in God and love God. Recently, I was in the Central Coast Conference for a spring conference assembly. And for whatever reason, whenever the Central Coast and I get together for a conversation, something really beautiful happens. And I think it's because the leaders who come, and it's mostly lay leaders who come, certainly the pastors are there too, but the lay leaders own their faith in a way that I find incredibly refreshing. And so I had said to folks, I think that God is calling us to be a church that is changing from a model where we have to have a pastor or a deacon leading us to the people do the work of the church. Of course, that's always been the model, but we have had the opportunity to have the pastors tell us what to do and how to do it. And it was great. It was great. But we don't have the economy to be able to continue to have our pastors and deacons tell us what to do. The people have to do it. So in this Central Coast meeting, I said to folks, I want you to tell me a story about a small thing that's happening. I want you to tell me about something new that has come up since the pandemic. I want you to talk about how lay leadership is changing your church. And a woman in the back raised her hand. I'm not even sure what congregation she was from. And some of you were in the room, but I don't even know. Maybe you can tell me later. But she was probably 80 years old. And she said, I want to tell you that last week I led a Bible study. So this was a lay person. I led a Bible study with the women of my church. And we talked about mental health. We used something from the Gather magazine, and we talked about the story of Naomi in the book of Ruth, and her grief, and her depression, and her anxiety, and her alienation. And it was great. And I said, wait. The church talked about mental illness. She said, yeah. And it was great. And to me, that's what God is calling the church to be, to talk about what the world cares about, what the world knows, and be honest about it. She certainly didn't say, hey, you know what, depression is awesome. She said, depression is real, and I have have it, and other people said, me too, and here is how I've experienced God in that. And suddenly, this congregation, who was not used to having lay leaders leading Bible study, were aware and compassionate and thinking about care in a different way. And we find that all over the place. I want to invite you now, if you're willing, to come to the microphone, and I'm going to give you a minute to think about it, because sometimes we don't think about it. We think about, well, we don't have a Sunday school anymore. Well, we had to cut our pastor's salary. You know, God is insistent, right? God is the God who created flowers that find a way to spring up in a crack in a sidewalk. That God is insistent that we keep going. God is insistent that life will keep going, that new things are happening. And so I want to invite you to tell us a story of something small. You may have ignored it. Something small that is happening among your people that you want to share. Now, I think in the past, we would come to these events and we would talk about our congregations and we try to one-up each other. Well, we had 75 people at the food bank. Well, we were able to fill, 95 homeless bags. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a connection that you made with another person that you know was God's will. So, okay, go ahead, please. Pastor Julie. Can you tell us where you're from?
Julie Morris, Mount Cross, Camarillo. And a small change that I hadn't put in this light, but since COVID, our preschool, which had been struggling a bit, decided to make two simple changes to take children at a younger age and to expand the hours that it was open. And there's a waiting list for most of the classes for the fall already. So it was responding to the needs of the community.
Yeah.
And stretching ourselves a bit, but.
Yeah, and can I ask you another question that you may not be prepared to answer, but we have had congregations talk about, well, we can't take younger kids because we need a different license. I don't know if you're doing infants or anything like that. It's going to be a bigger commitment. We can't expand. Did you have to have that conversation?
We did have to go to licensing and get a little bit different. We had to, because it was a longer day, have a place to store cots so that kids could take a nap, right? So there's a little more clutter in our parish life center. There isn't as much accessibility for parish programs into all of our rooms throughout the whole day. So it has been about accommodating, but it's an opportunity to practice hospitality and conflict resolution.
Truly the conflict resolution piece, absolutely. Anybody else want to share a story? Yeah, Francis, you'll go to there's a microphone up in the center. While she's walking up, I want to ask you, how many of you have Zoom Bible studies that are continuing, even after the pandemic, and you've been surprised, look at how many hands are going up, surprised how many seniors that we never thought were going to be able to do Zoom, right? I mean, when we first started, we said, well, we can't have Zoom Bible studies because our seniors will never figure out Zoom. And how many of them are now doing beautiful, beautiful things and inviting people from other parts of the world to be a part of it. Francis Hale.
Hi, I'm Francis Gallen with Trinity Lutheran in Pasadena. And this past Palm Sunday, another church member and I, we always put palms up in the church. So when people walk through, they walk through the palms. It's really beautiful. And it was a little drizzly that day, and you're grumpy and complaining, like, oh my God, I can't wait to do this. Oh my God, someone else do this again. Blah, 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 blah. Then we get there, and your member met us. And she was excited about the opportunity to be able to participate in putting up these palms. And it was such a heart check about, we have this opportunity to create a beautiful experience for people on Palm Sunday to come in and do, I like to call it feel it. Feel Palm Sunday. Feel whatever it is. And it was
does an incredible spread of food for special events. And I think she does it herself. And she had, 20 different dishes and dips and all of this stuff laid out in a beautiful setting. It's not what she does professionally. And I happened to mention during the sermon how things like hospitality, things like welcome, are a ministry. This is a pastor's wife who's been doing this for decades. And she came to me later and she said, I never thought of my food service as a ministry. What? Probably most people in the room would say this is the best ministry of the whole church. But it had never occurred to her. Because I think what I had said is, look, if you're the one that plugs the coffee pot in on Sunday morning, God bless you, right? And so to realize that these small things matter. The other story I want to tell is I was at St. John's in Gardena for Palm Sunday. And St. John's is one of the congregations that goes out and processes down Crenshaw Boulevard with guitars singing in Spanish. And we stopped at the corner right down the street from the church, which was a liquor store. And we stood in the parking lot and we prayed for the city of Gardena. And at the liquor store at 9:30 in the morning, there were 3 or 4 gentlemen who were drinking beer. And we were praying for them with kindness, right? We were saying, God, you bless these people. We ask that they and their families have what they need. And then we got back on our way and we were playing guitars again. And I thought, I wish we would have stopped and said to those guys, God bless you. You're a blessing to this congregation or to this community. Because they probably thought, oh, those Christians, what are they saying about us? And I wish we would have taken the moment to say, we see you and love you as you are. And I think that is a key piece of what we have to remember. A lot of the messaging about what Christianity is judgmental and cruel and closed-minded. And so to be able to share with people, actually, we love you. And our faith in God tells us to love you. And you're awesome. Is good news. Is a surprising bit of gospel. So thank you for that. Because I agree with you. Just a warm feeling. And that's not we're not talking about faith as an emotion. We're talking about I felt good while I was there. And I matter and this matters. Yeah, thank you. Would anybody else like to share a story? Here comes Kenneth Davis from Bethel, Virginia. Hi, Pastor.
Hi, Bishop. This past Lent, we're a small community in Synod, and we do not have any midweek Lenten services. So I said, how can I connect our community in a meaningful way during Lent? And so actually, I had this meditation book that I've had for 3 years by Howard Thurman, and I've always wanted to go through it. It was a 40-day meditation by Howard Thurman, and I said, I'm going to offer a Zoom morning meditation at 7 a.m. for 7 minutes, and we're going to go through this meditation. And I was surprised. The first day, we had 17 people on the Zoom meditation. The next day, we had 21. And I think one morning, we had as many as 33 people on the Zoom meditation. That's more than come to worship. And friends were inviting friends out of state. We were able to hold space for a gentleman whose wife was actively dying of cancer. And this past May 23rd, we ended the Zoom meditation at 100 days. And we will resume again September 1st with another meditation series. It was really, I'll be honest with you, the reason I did the meditation was because I was never disciplined enough to go through the meditation book. I would pick it up and I would read, and then 3 days later I pick it up. And so I wanted to be consistent and go through it for 40 days, and then having them hold me accountable is actually what made me complete it. So we completed 100 days when we started out with only planning to do 40 days, and now we're going to start it again in September 7th.
And a small thing, right? 7 minutes a day is how it started. That's great. For those of you on Zoom, if you would like to share a story or ask a question, you can raise your hand and I can hear you and see you. So I just want to give you that opportunity. So let me tell you a little bit more about, here I am telling you that I don't know exactly what we're supposed to be doing, but I do know that God is with us, and I think God is calling lay leaders to step up. We will always have pastors. We will always have deacons. Please don't worry that I'm just trying to blow the whole thing up. I'm not. But I think that we used to have a time where even the smallest congregation that could only afford pulpit supply could have somebody, because we had a lot of retired pastors who were still well enough to serve. And over the course of the time that I've been here, not just as bishop, but as assistant to the bishop, many of those people have retired for good, have moved away, have decided that they can't serve in that capacity. And so we used to be able to just kind of fill the gaps, and we can't to the same degree anymore. And I refuse to believe that it's because we're lacking, right? That it's scarcity. I think this is God asking us to depend upon each other and laity to lead and to teach and occasionally to preach. So part of what we're doing as a synod and throughout the ELCA we're doing this is trying to equip lay people. We're giving preaching classes. We're trying to teach people about the things we think matter most. Lutheran theology, Lutheran sacraments, our identity, and caring for the neighbor. These are the things that we think make us Lutheran. And by the way, I don't mean liturgy has to be out of the ELW, it might. But the idea that a Lutheran service is thoughtfully thinking about what we're trying to do, right? Gathering, word, meal, sending. Those things matter, and how you do it in between can be in a variety of ways. But we know that that matters, because we are the people of God called to serve. So when I started, we decided as a Synod Assembly to pass a budget that was quite large. And our giving had been the same for several years. Even during the pandemic, our giving did not drop all that much. And it's still the case. And many of my colleague bishops have said, oh, our giving's down 15, 20, 25%. Our giving here, if you look at the budget, we were 3% off of budget last year. That's remarkable. And I continue to thank you for your faithfulness and your generosity, which in the way that we do it, it's passive giving, right? You continue to give to your congregation at the level that you've been giving, and your congregation gives to us. So you may not be writing checks to the synod, but we want to thank you for the fact that your giving on the congregational level has remained pretty vigorous, and therefore our money has been the same. But we wanted to try some new things, and maybe I had shared this with you at the time. I had visited the church in El Salvador, which is our companion synod, and their bishop had very intentionally placed people on staff to care about things like mental health, climate justice, education, regular health, these types of things. And I thought, boy, I like that model, that instead of it just being, we care for the church, we care for the individual needs or the group needs of our cities. And so this is what we work towards. To be honest, I think that we now need to look at ways to use our real estate better, ways to teach our lay people how to serve. These are sort of the shifts that we're going toward. But we had a lot of staff. And we agreed as a Synod Assembly to pass a budget that was in deficit. The reason we agreed to that is because we had so many building sales that we had a large amount of cash. We have since sold even more buildings. So we have had a great influx of cash. The Synod Council is now wondering about how much longer can we spend at a deficit. We're moving some of our money into investment accounts because we believe we have enough money that the income coming off of those investment accounts could pay for a lot of our deficit. Through attrition and through some changes in staffing, we will also be spending less money on staff in the coming year. But it's this weird balance, and one that I'm still trying to figure out. On some levels, we need to think of ourselves as not having enough money because we have a deficit budget, and so we should spend less. But on the other level, we have a lot of money in reserve. Should we sock it away and save it for a rainy day? Should we work our money and use it in investments? Should we start giving it away at a more vigorous clip? To be frank, one of the conversations we keep having happening is, yes, and we're not a bank. Because a lot of times people ask us, can we loan the money, and that kind of thing, and we haven't gotten into that. But I have to tell you, it is part of the tension of what are we doing? What are we doing with our money, and what's the most thoughtful thing to do? And we've had people come and ask us for large grants. And there's been reasons why we say yes, and there's been reasons why we say no, and there's tension about that. And I think that that's good, actually. I mean, I don't want to be in conflict, but I think us having honest conversations about what are we doing matter. And so tomorrow we will be looking at a budget that once again has a big deficit. It is down $100,000 from last year, but we're still spending a lot of money because we thought that this is the way we wanted to invest and care for congregations. But I have to tell you again, in my own heart, I'm starting to wonder, right? And I'm sure that you are as well. And so this is part of the conversation that we are having. And frankly, I feel very blessed that we have enough money to wonder about these things, as opposed to just saying, well, that's over, we can't spend money anymore. One last thing, and then I'll take your questions. You may have heard over the last several months, we've had several staff transitions, and we will have some more. Senior staff has left my office. And these are situations that I was very sad about. I understood. I was part of that. And yet it has been a loss. And again, it feels like a parallel experience with the church, that what we hoped would be true hasn't been. We've made some adjustments. We need a director of evangelical mission, the DEM. That was Pastor Cheryl Cruz. She has left, and we are in a national search for a new DEM. That position is the only one on staff that works for both the Synod and the ELCA. And so the job search is an interview with both entities. And so we are talking, we're getting applications now, and when we feel that we have enough of a pool to put together that panel, that'll be some from here and some from Chicago or from the ELCA, we'll start interviewing the directors of evangelical mission. This time of year, the spring, summer, certainly the strategic ministries and the New Starts would love pastoral care, and we're giving them some of that, but their grant cycle and their sort of practical paperwork doesn't happen until the fall. So it's not optimal, but it's not terrible that we don't have people in place. And frankly, our new director of finance and administration, Fernando Russo, took care of a lot of the granting and the paperwork this last fall. We also had an assistant to the bishop for rostered leadership, Tony Castaneda Carrera. She has departed, and we have been very excited about how the existing staff has been able to step up for that. So Julia Morales, who's not ordained but incredibly gifted, has been taking over that position, and we've been very, very happy with her work. And so she's in constant conversation with me and with Tracy Williams, who is ordained and is doing congregational care. And basically the three of us with strong support staff, Robin Lujan, Claudia Yao, other members of the team, are talking about all of our call processes, are talking about all of our candidacy, and with the institutional knowledge that Robin has and with the conversations that we're all having all the time, we're continuing to look for filling calls. The problem is, if there's a problem, is that a lot of our congregations cannot afford a full-time pastor anymore, and they had a call process 8 years ago that went pretty good, pretty quickly. But they also were able to pay full-time. And so now maybe they can only pay part-time in an economy where housing is exorbitant in Southern California. And so call processes are taking longer because it takes us a while to find somebody who can afford to come or who would even dare think about coming. And it's one of the best things that happened was that I was recently meeting with a call committee who was frustrated. Why is this so much harder than it was 8 years ago? And I thought, oh, I'm so glad you said it out loud, because we've been saying, look, it's different. But no, they were comparing it to the way it was before, like all of us do. And they needed to know that it's a harder process now. We still have very good congregations here that are going to be good calls, but it takes longer. When I was an assistant to the bishop for rostered leaders, there were 200 names of people that would be interested in coming to Southern California. Now there's 40. And so it's been a lot of a bigger challenge. And yet, God is faithful. And our congregations in transition have found ways to find strength and from within while they're waiting. So that's part of what's going on here. And so I'd like to take any questions that you might have about any of the things I've said, including thinking about money, thinking about staffing, those kinds of things. One thing I'll say is, so the transition in staff has been hard, and another time of real grief for me. And when I ask other bishops, is it just me? They say, what are you, about 2.5 years into it? This is exactly when it happens. This is exactly when staff starts to shift. And we find that in a lot of businesses, right? But it feels chaotic, and it might be, and this is people figuring out, discerning out, or I discern that they shouldn't be with us, or whatever. But this is about the time when you start to make big shifts. I don't like it, but it is, I think, a common part of growth as an organization. And as we continue, as I do my own work on being much more clear about what my vision is and how to communicate that so everybody knows how to operate within it, I think that's helped a lot. I have made plenty of mistakes, and am working toward that. But I'm hoping with God's grace that being able to be honest about that is actually helpful to you as you realize that we are all in this together and try to be listening to each other and open to what God is doing in our midst. Any other questions?
Pastor Eric Gaynor from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Thousand Oaks. 2 quick questions based on what you just said. One has to do with the buildings and one has to do with the call process.
Yeah.
Just curious, we're here in the Lutheran Center today. It's great to be down here and it's been very festive. Just wondering what are ways this building has been used and kind of parallel to that, other spaces in our synod being used in creative ways. And then second part of that question is there any conversation about multiple point calls to help congregations be able to afford staff, but maybe can't afford full-time staff, just like a lot of our rural areas in the U.S. Do multiple point calls?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me first start talking about this building. This building is rented by several renters. We have, I think, 3 congregations that use the building on Sunday or during the week. A Calvary Chapel, if you can believe it, a very, very small offshoot of a Roman Catholic congregation, and an Armenian group all use this sanctuary. We did have Bloy House, which was the Episcopal Church's seminary, and they're moving out because their seminary model is changing. I gotta confess, we haven't used our buildings, our vacant buildings, with a lot of creativity. There's certainly been some things. We used a former building in Chatsworth for food programs and things like that, but we were mostly just sort of renting, or they were vacant. We had a congregation, a church in Pasadena, the former Messiah Pasadena, that was vacant for a really long time, and we were constantly paying for vandalism and things like that. So that was one of the congregations that we felt we should not have anymore. And I appreciate the question, because I think that there are opportunities, and we haven't really had the people, and I don't mean synod staff, I mean mission developers who are like, oh, I can do this thing with this place. And I think I'd like to wonder about that with the new DEM as well, about what that could be like. But it is true that we have mostly chosen to sell buildings. And knowing who's in the room right now, I know there have been plenty of people who've thought that wasn't a great idea, because what if? We'll never get it back, that kind of thing. But so far we've thought, okay, let's use the money for other ministries. But to my earlier point, we haven't completely named what those new ministries should look like, or if it should go into investment to pay for the future. Second question is about multi-point parishes. And I keep making the joke, but it's real. I think we're the only synod in the country that doesn't have multi-point parishes. I mean, because everybody is doing it. I mean, Montana Synod, half of their congregations are vacant. And so they've had to do multi-point parishes, but the geographic distance between the churches is so great that it's been really hard. I've been hearing a lot about East Coast churches that are doing models where they've got 6 congregations with a pastor and a deacon being shared by those 6 congregations and 6 synodically authorized ministers, which are lay pastors. And so those people, between the 8 of them, take care of 6 congregations. I don't know that we need to be at that point, but I'd be really interested in 3 and 1 and that kind of thing. But the way it works is people have to agree to change their worship time, or they have to agree that they're going to lift up lay leaders from among them to take care of things along the way. And again, knowing who's in the room, some of you have had congregations where the pastor had to be out for a while on a sick leave, and individuals in the congregation stepped up and led worship and those types of things in relationship with us so that we could support it, and it was a time of real growth. People from Christ Long Beach were in the session at the last meeting and said occasionally we had to step up and preach and teach. We didn't want to do it all the time, but we grew during that period because there was something exciting and spiritually based about that. And many, many of you have been lifting up lay leaders, and it's actually been a time of great joy. So yes, we need to do more of this multi-point parish stuff. I would love it. And it's not a conversation that gets solved in 2 meetings, because people then go, oh gosh, we're really doing this. And they kind of panic. And I think a real shame is that a lot of us are now so small with so few resources and not enough energy. And so you get to a congregation that has 12 people who've been faithful for 45 years, but they don't have the energy to do a new thing, and they're just somehow hoping that suddenly something will happen. And so you have to be able to care for that and love them and see if there's something that the small group can do, because sometimes they can, and help them to envision that maybe it's time to share with somebody else, which isn't going to be horrible. That's what God is doing, but it takes a while for people to give up the theology of place. And think about that for a minute, right? Our theology of place. This is my church. This matters. And instead of a theology of the journey that God is taking us on. And God bless us. I understand why that's hard. Actually, I have to admit, I don't understand that as much because I moved to a lot of different churches as a young person. I don't have a church that I really call home to the same degree. So and I have to admit that too when I'm caring for all of you, and I'm like, I don't understand. It's just a building. No. I'm the outlier on that, right? And so I need to be really compassionate about that. Did that kind of answer the question a little bit? Yeah. Anyone else have any questions or comments? So I really feel deeply, I think I've said it and I'll keep saying it, I really feel deeply that God is calling us to discipleship. And the ELCA is really moving toward that too. A report came out recently where the ELCA had planted 307 new starts and 7 became congregations. And they said, oh my gosh, this failure rate is way too high. And then we realized maybe we were working on the wrong thing. Maybe we weren't supposed to be building new churches. We were simply supposed to be making new disciples. And those disciples might be people that only come for your food program, but learn that God loves them as they get handed a bag of groceries. It's possible that disciples are going to be moved because of your kindness rather than the fact that they're sitting in a pew on Sunday. I know that the church is going to continue. So please don't hear me say, look, we're almost done. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that our measurement of success is changing. And so, of course, there's grief and confusion around that. In our last session, somebody said to me, how do we change the model of profit and people and money? And I said, well, what is God calling us to? And, Jesus said, make disciples. Jesus didn't say build buildings. Again, our buildings matter to us, but I think this is part of what God is shifting us to. And I get a lot of hope, because all of people who are still in church are in love with Jesus, are committed to living a life following Christ. And in this world, in this time where our nation is absolutely in a terrible crisis of division, the church has something to say about that. The church has something to say about loving each other in struggle. The church has something to say about offering peace, turning the other cheek, bringing a cup of cold water in Jesus' name. And so I think this is what our call is now. And so that is what I am hoping to encourage you about. You know how to do that. You have been doing that since you were in Sunday school. And so I think this call to love is what God is calling us to. God's going to have to figure out the math. But we know that we will have been faithful people if we live as Jesus has taught us to live. Anything else? Anything on Zoom? So one last invitation. A lot of us use the printed prayers that come from our worship inserts or from Sundays and Seasons, and those are beautiful. And it's one of my favorite things about the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America is our publications are solid, beautiful, and theologically solid. But I want to invite you to think about taking one petition a week and say, God, show us what you want this congregation to do. This congregation in this time, in this place. God, show us what these people would look like following you. And I don't know when you're going to get an answer, but I think you will. And I think this is what God is asking us to do. God is saying, right now, in this place, with these people, what can we do to serve God and our neighbor? And it's going to look different than it used to look, right? You're not going to open a new K through 12. But you might do something that's exactly right for what the people around us need. Because if you ask me, we've seen over and over again, the world needs God's love more than ever. And we've got that. So let's pray. Oh God, we ask that you show us what you want us to do. Show us who you want us to be. Open our ears to the cries of our neighbor. Soften our hearts as we learn about each other and the things that we care about. And show us that we actually know. We have enough. We know how to love. We know how to serve. We know how to care. We know how to listen. Show us that this is all you want from us, is to love our neighbor and to serve you. I ask that you encourage these people of faith, that they know that they are your beloved children. And this is a difficult time, and you have been with your children in difficult times since the very beginning of creation. Help us to be faithful. Send us your Spirit so that we can trust in you. Help us to not depend upon our own abilities, but to trust in you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Thank you for being with us. At 3 o'clock, our treasurer will be giving his report in here. If you would, he has a report again tomorrow, but if you have questions about the budget, if you want to hear about his thinking on things, that's at 3 o'clock. For those of you on Zoom, you can stay. For those of you on YouTube, we'll probably, I don't know, maybe we'll keep the camera open, but this will be the same link if you want to hear that. And for those of you who heard this report and other members of your congregations are out doing something else, this will be available on the SoCal Synod YouTube channel soon, so that you can have other people watch that if you would like. God bless you. I hope you feel encouraged. I know that I've been telling you that it's different. I don't think it's bad. I think it's sacred. I think God, as somebody said to me this morning, sometimes God just wants to show off. And so maybe that's what God is doing, getting ready to show off by making something out of much less than we used to have. So thank you for being here. God bless you.
Page at page 124. So if you have the book or the PDF, it should be at page 124. So the basics of our budget for this year is we're looking at having an income coming into the Synod of about $951,000. If only we could live on $951. So $951,000, that is our projected income. One of the things that we always have to keep in mind is that the line that's greatest in this area is mission support. Half of all those dollars go straight to churchwide. So 50% automatically gets taken out of that income line. So any other expenses after that have to be funded in some other way than just our regular income. So you will see that there's $400,000 in this projected budget that will go to the churchwide office. Then the next section is our payroll expenses. It's broken down by bishop because we're required to have a bishop. Everything after that, we are not required to have by our Constitution. So we have to have a bishop, so that's why bishop is set aside. Our senior staff are assistants to the bishops. If you want to know who that includes or what positions those include, at the end of this budget, there's a listing of the people, of the positions, whether they're full-time, part-time, and also whether they're exempt. Then comes our support staff, which is anybody who is not a rostered leader serving in an assistant to the bishop position or a director position. And then we have two special categories that are senior and youth. These are two synodical specialized ministries that are separated out for our viewing so that you can see how much we spend on youth ministry and how much we spend on senior ministry for those personnel. Then we continue into our general expenses for the Synod. Those come in forms of administration, which includes our insurance, everything it takes to run the office of the bishop. So every dollar that gets spent on copier, copy paper, postage, that's all included in there. Following that is monies that we have set aside for specialized synodical ministries. So these would be things like the MLK worship that happens every year that is worked on with ADLA. Our communications, which we have a separate line item. Translation services, so anything that gets translated for any of our meetings goes into this section. Also, this is where you're going to find programmatic monies for our senior ministry and our youth ministry. And then in our Constitution, we have several mission teams that are defined constitutionally and how they support the role of the mission in our Synod. And those folks get a certain amount of money to help them with their role in doing the ministry that they're asked to do in our Constitution and by the Synod Council. So each of these groups has a different amount of money assigned to them that they use for their programmatic expenses. Then there's a special area for the council. So anything that the council needs to be able to do their jobs as council members, hold meetings, anything that needs to be communicated out to the Synod on behalf of the council. And then there is our last item, which is the assembly. So everything we're required by the Constitution to have an assembly. We have it one every year. And this is our budget area where we put the information about how much is it going to cost, how much the Synod has to receive in from registration, how much the Synod is going to have to pay over and above registration. So our total expenses for this year is $1,768,020. So again, you're going to notice right off the bat that it's much greater than our income that we have coming in above. And how do we make up that difference? So the shortfall is $817,000. Where we get this money is the Synod gets gifted properties from congregations that have lived out their lives and have chosen to close or potentially merge with other congregations and return their property to the Synod. Once we receive those properties, the Synod makes an evaluation on whether ministry can be done at those locations, if they can be used for some other purpose that would benefit the Synod, or they may be looked at for a potential sale of property because we don't need a mission in that area. There's too many Lutheran churches already, whatever the case may be. And we use a certain portion of those funds. There's a formula within our Constitution that describes how those funds are to be broken down from the sale of a property. The basis for this portion is 1/3 of the sale after tithing to church-wide a certain amount, after putting money into our own property expenses for managing the property. Then 1/3 of that remainder gets set aside for the operational expenses of the office of the bishop. The other 2/3 is then retained for other mission and ministry projects, new starts, new ministries in our Synod, innovative ministries that might be happening, and again, that's defined in the Constitution, and that is governed by the evangelical mission team. The mission team for evangelical outreach, the bishop, and usually the director of evangelical mission. Those three entities will determine, what is where it needs to be used, and they will then approach the Synod Council and say, we would like X number of dollars to be spent from these funds for these ministries. And that is the basics of our budget. You also have a copy of the 2024 budget. Unfortunately, because we plan so far ahead in our cycle, we do not have any data about what 2024 is going to look like, because at this point, we are only 4 months into that fiscal year. So we don't have any real good data about what the year is going to look like for 2024 to be able to look back and say, okay, we need to adjust our funding for 2025. So we're looking at our 2023 numbers, making a guess what 2025 is going to look like, and then produce our budget. So 2024 budget is there, so you can see what the difference is and how it looked in the side by side. This year, the Budget and Finance Committee made the recommendation that we cut $100,000 from the previous budget. We did this in two ways. One is realizing some more income from the First Lutheran Los Angeles Fund. We will be taking a larger draw than we've done in the past. Currently, we draw 4.5% off that investment. We will be drawing 5% in the future years. So that extra income will be here to support the office of the bishop. The other place is and that's a small amount. That's only about $10,000 or $20,000 that's going to be in that adjustment. The rest of the money is coming from cuts that we've made to last year's budget. There are some things that we have budgeted for in 2024 that we do not need to budget this year. One is a redesign of our website. There was an increase on improving the infrastructure here at the Lutheran Center for Glendale. So those items we were able to take out of the budget from the previous year and reduce that. We also reduced the staffing by one full-time person. So again, we've given enough wiggle room in that area that the bishop is able to staff her office as necessary. But we are asking that for 2025 that there be one full-time person cut from our payroll expenses. That's the nuts and bolts of it. It's the short version. I'd like to open it up to questions if you have questions. So if not, I do have some questions that people have already emailed me, and I'll be happy to answer those at this time.
Question. I found it very difficult with the way the formatting came out and the Google Doc with which we received this to follow a lot of the things that were identified in the budget. I would really appreciate a way to get a printed copy of how it's supposed to look, because in the Google Doc it's all mushed together. I've got lines that run along. I have open pages between sections in the actual document itself.
Okay. I would probably contact Robin about that. If you need hard copies, there are hard copies available from the Synod office. Sure. Pastor Berkedahl.
Mike, David Berkedahl, retired member of Christ Lutheran Church in West Covina. We've been the Synod at the synodical administrative level has been dependent on the sale of properties resulting from the closure of churches for a long time. And throughout that time, it seemed like there's a plan to move towards sustainability. I'm still not seeing what that plan is. Last year, Bishop Boss acknowledged that we depend on the closure of churches and the sale of their property to operate the Synod's business. And many have asked, what happens when we run out of churches to sell? And her reply at that time, as I recall, was grants. This year, she said that there is money from the sale of churches that has come in at a higher rate than we anticipated that is in flux. We're not sure how that's going to be spent, but one idea has been to create a fund so that we can continue to receive money from that fund in order to maintain the administrative functions of the Synod. So my question is, what is the plan for that time which will come when we no longer have churches to sell? Is that the time we just pull the plug and ask someone to turn the lights off when they leave? Or is there something else that can maintain a combination of income and expenditures that will allow this ministry to continue?
That is an excellent question, David, Pastor Berkedahl. I think the short answer is this year, specifically the Budget and Finance Committee has done some heavy lifting on rearranging our Constitution a little bit to give the Synod the ability to have a committee to invest these funds in a way that provides long-term income. So again, right now these are kind of short-term solutions for us. We are going to probably always need to rely on some outside source of funds outside of mission support. I don't know that we can really live on $400,000 to be able to support the mission and ministry of the Synod. However, the thing that the Budget and Finance Committee has done is form an investment committee. We have some very intelligent people on this investment committee, and we have recommended the hiring of an investment firm to help us manage these investments in a way that brings the maximum amount of return without creating a huge amount of risk. So you'll hear it in my report tomorrow, but we have contracted with UBS Investment Advisors. There's a group called the Spinner Group, which some of our other partners in the Synod actually use. So we are going to be contracting with them to help us come up with investment policies that, one, make sense for the Synod as far as managing what our income is and what the use of this principal amount is, and also to make sure that we are within realms of that we're not buying stock in Philip Morris or in in the local cannabis club. So again, we're developing those policies as we speak. We already have some of this money invested in their money market fund. So right now it's earning about 5.25%. But this is only a short-time investment for us. Once we have an investment policy that the Synod Council has signed off on and makes sense, then we will be moving forward on putting these into some more diverse investments that hopefully will prolong these funds in the future, and we will not have to simply wait and hope that some congregation closes and we can sell the building. So I will be honest, and I think one of the things that people don't realize is when the merger happened in 1988 now, you could have 3 Lutheran churches within 1 square mile. So, at the time of the merger, there were plenty of Lutherans to go around, and it still looked like a good thing that we could have that many churches. But I think there wasn't very much forethought in that merger plan that said, okay, do we really need to have 2 Lutheran churches that are within 2 miles of each other? Is that sustainable? And how do we work with these people on making it more sustainable? So I think that's when we look at these and we go, why are there so many churches closing? We kind of have an overabundance of properties and an underabundance of Lutherans. I wish that weren't the case, because I certainly remember the days of my youth at Bethel and Encino, and I can't tell you that it breaks my heart when I drive down the freeway and I don't see that steeple there. So that is a reality here in Southern California for Lutheran churches, but I feel that very deeply in a personal way. But I also understand that it's a reality, that this is a conversation that needs to be had.
Thank you, Mike.
Sure.
Reverend Drew Stever from Hope Lutheran in Hollywood. I noticed between the 2024 and 2025 for the support staff, the line item, the amount that was budgeted for 2025 is about over $100,000 less than what was budgeted for 2024. So I'm curious about that, if you could talk to that, and like maybe if you are able to share what the bishop's vision is for that. And I have a follow-up to that, if that's part one.
Okay, Pastor Drew. Yeah. The easy part of that is that during the last year, between 23 and 2024, there was already a position that had been eliminated out of that area. It was kind of a natural progression that in developing the staffing model that we realized that this position was no longer needed. So that took out about almost $50,000 out of that line item. Then again, the Budget and Finance, in looking at this, said, we think there can be further cuts in this one area because there's an awful lot of support staff people. So we eliminated another position out of that. So that's where the difference came between 2024 and 2025.
Cool. My follow-up is, as we talk about there's this abundance in the budget now, I'm wondering what conversations are being had about resources that can be provided for clergy wellness as we continue to navigate in a world as the world is currently, and as congregations continue to struggle. And just wondering, as the Synod operates with a little less capacity, what resources might be provided for clergy support?
I think that's a really great question. I think that's ultimately a question that's probably better asked of the bishop. Mm-hmm. However, if you were to ask me where would this funding come from, how would that look? I would say that the mission team for rostered leaders would be the one that would be developing some type of program to help support rostered leaders in their role in our congregations. Now, what that looks like, I wouldn't be able to tell you. What I know about rostered leaders and what they potentially need is from a position that is not going to be helpful for any rostered leader out there. I feel that our rostered leaders need support. I also feel that our rostered leaders especially need to be taking vacation time, and if they can, to be paid within guidelines. But in the end, it's the mission team for rostered leaders that should have a plan of this is what rostered leaders are telling us they need to support them, and this is what they're now telling the Synod Council and the bishop of what they need, of what we need to be doing to help support those clergy. I think another part of that is if you are in that section. So if you look at the Constitution and you go to section 15, I think it's 15.34 or 15.37, that tells about the breakdown of a property sale. That specific section that has to do with the 2/3 that is reserved outside of the operating expenses for the bishop, I think that's a way for us to be able to pay for some of these items, especially if it fits within in that category. So it would provide a little help for our congregations. I also would would speak to that if congregations need a little extra money in supporting their rostered leader, apply for a mission and ministry grant. You know, we didn't spend any as much money last year as we could have, and this year I think it's going to be in the same boat. So I think if your congregation can figure out a way that makes sense to unload some of the burden on your rostered leader, apply for the mission and ministry grant.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure. Pastor.
I currently serve on the endowment committee, which did not get an answer in order to put out the mission and ministry grant application this spring. There were several impediments on that, but in the last 2 deliberations of the endowment committee, they have said they really don't want to be funding staff as a regular procedure.
Again, I didn't say that recommending staff, but I recommended ways that congregations could unload the burden. That doesn't mean hiring more staff to necessarily do what your rostered leader needs, but that may be developing a program that will unload some of the burden that your rostered leader has, which falls under mission. So while I'm not saying, yes, we're going to pay your rostered leader to go on vacation to Maui, we are going to say, if you have a program where you have lay leadership that is able to go and get training to do some of the work that a rostered leader does, confirmation class, first communion, baptismal prep, whatever, then come to mission and ministry and say, look, we want to train lay leaders to teach first communion class and give the pastor a day off. Great. Put it in writing, tell us what your plan is, let us know the numbers, and bring it to endowment. So, again, and to speak to you, I know that endowment will at some point give grants. So when the grant cycle opens up, have your congregation be prepared. Say, I've got a great idea that is going to take some of the pressure off me. All right? I hope that was helpful, Pastor Marcia. Okay. I'm going to answer one. So Pastor Caleb Craner, who isn't able to be here, had sent me a list of questions that he had prior to. So I'm going to take one of his questions. So his first question is, there was a budgeted line item last year, 5003.1, which was budgeted for donations. And he was asking what happened to this and did they ever materialize? The short answer is no, they did not. So we did not have a program in place. The bishop had hoped to do some fundraising during the year, which would have brought the income into this area. It did not happen, and with Bishop's busy schedule, we're not thinking that, and she hasn't said that she would be able to fulfill any kind of commitment to that budget item. So that's why it was removed. He also talked about, line item 6233.2, the legal expenses. And if you look at our budget versus actual, they're quite a bit higher. When we were looking at developing the budget for 2023, we look at when we look at developing any budget, we have to look into a crystal ball and try to look and see what expenses we might be incurring. There are certain things that happen that are outside of our scope of even seeing. Last year, Faith San Dimas had decided they wanted to disassociate from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. With that, they wanted to take their property with them. They needed permission from the Synod to do that. It was brought before Synod Assembly, and the Synod Assembly decided to retain the property and wish them well in whatever new iteration that Faith San Dimas felt they needed to be. Unfortunately, this caused a legal battle, which we knew was going to happen at last year, but it was way past 2023 budget. This has meant a large increase in the amount of legal fees that we had to spend in 2023 and the amount of legal fees that we will be spending in 2024. Again, this was unforeseen at the time when we were planning even the 2024 budget. So this one area is going to be a large increase. Again, that is unexpected, unplanned, but is necessary and mandated by our marching orders from the Synod Assembly. So again, that answers that. And again, why our expenses were so much greater for our fiscal year 2023. Pastor Marcia.
Numbers kind of gal, so this is like one of the more exciting opportunities for me to dig into stuff. So pardon me for so many questions, but hopefully it'll help you too. On the two budgets, we have the proposed budget for 24 and the proposed budget for 25. Are the captions on the two budgets?
Yes.
Okay, so we're voting today on a budget that has finance or accounting for $35,000, but does not have an audit until next year for 2025. And we have not had an audit since like 2019.
That's we haven't. We are at 2020 right now. Right now, our 2020 audit and 2021 audits are being performed.
Okay.
So again, we will. That's going to save us some money because they're able to do twice. They don't have to repeat some of the work that they're doing. So that's going to be less. But yes, we're still keep budgeting that amount in there. We know exactly how much our audit is going to be because it's the same price for us every year. So any money that we had budgeted for last year, we don't push it forward to this year, but we'll catch up eventually.
But the difference, just to be clear, that I saw was that in 2024, there's only an accounting line, no audit line, whereas in 2025 it has accounting for $35,000 and audit for another $35,000.
There should be an audit line in 2024.
I didn't see it in the same section of accounting. I'm looking at what I just re-downloaded to make sure I got it right.
It says outside professional expenses for audit in 2024. Okay. Okay, yeah, it's in 6223. It's in 6233.1. Yep, sure do. Any other questions? And I'll add another question from Pastor Caleb, if you'd like. Pastor Caleb asked about bank charges. Why do we have bank charges at all? The bank charges us things like for wire transfers, which we do occasionally in the Synod. When we accept or send ACH payments, there is a fee to do that. We also have remote deposit capture. So when you send your checks here to the Synod, they go up to the accounting office, and our bookkeeper deposits them directly at her desk using the same type of reader that you would see a teller using at the bank, and it gets directly deposited into our account at the credit union. So that comes with a monthly fee as well. Our additional fees come. So when you go to Tithely and you submit your payment for registration or for the Western States Youth Gathering, or you make some kind of donation, they charge for that to be processed, that credit card to be processed. Those go into bank charges. So this last year, we had a lot of funds that came in for Western States Youth Gathering. They were large amounts. So $1,500, $1,700, $2,000, $2,400, $5,000. Those are bank charges that come at two ways. There's a rate based on the card that's used, and then there is a transaction fee. So all those go into bank charges. So again, when you go onto Tithely and use it, be aware that that goes into our bottom line for bank charges. If you'd like to give to the Synod and reduce that amount, there is a way in Tithely that you can say include charges, and you pay the charges and the Synod doesn't. So that is an option. I am not saying you have to do that or that we're complaining about it, but the bank charges that we have here are cost. I hate to use this word because it sounds horrible, but it's the cost of doing business. So for us to do the daily things that we need to for accounting, for depositing, for banking, this is the cost that we have to absorb for doing that. There was another question from Pastor Caleb about mission team for leadership, or about mission teams and the money that was budgeted for them. So we receive requests from the bishop and from the mission teams about how much money they think they're going to be spending for programmatic expenses. One of these items was an education line that was not spent. He's asking, why was that not spent? As the treasurer, I can't tell you why it wasn't spent. I don't sit on those committees, and I don't have any relationship with them to say, hey, you need to be spending your money. They need to develop their programs and spend the money that we've budgeted for them. Again, it's also one of those things that if they've made the ask and it hasn't been spent, they can ask again next year, but again, it's just money that we didn't spend because they didn't spend it. So if there's money that's on there that is especially in a mission team or in a synodical mission, it's because it wasn't spent for whatever reason. And that, again, you'd have to ask the mission team about that, or ask the bishop why that wasn't a priority for that year. Pastor Marcia. No, you know what, Pastor Marcia, please do not feel bad, because yes, every question you ask is a question that somebody else has.
I don't want to feel like other people to feel like they can't ask questions if I keep asking. But again, I was trained in budgets when I was 18, 19 years old, so this is something I've been doing for most of my adult life. I'm not clear where we see the plan for how much we think we'll be able to spend for the endowment committee on mission and ministry and Warner grants. So I saw them in some of the expenses on some of the reports, but like we didn't distribute all the money last time because several of the things people weren't clear when they applied of how they were supposed to be applying and what they were applying for, hence the comment about not paying for staff per se.
Right.
But I'm not seeing them in the budgets either.
They are not a budgeted item, because you got to remember the way our funds work for mission and ministry, First Lutheran Los Angeles Fund. These are not expenses and incomes for the office of the bishop. These are managed as separate funds. So if you want to find out how much is available for that, you're going to go to the balance sheet. Okay. And you're going to find it in there's a section in I believe it's the 3600 area.
Okay.
And you're going to see mission and ministry fund, and it'll give you how much is in principal, how much is been earned for that time period, and then you're going to see basically how much is available to be released. All right?
Okay, thank you. That's helpful because that was not available to us when we were trying to do the application in March so that we could have disbursements at this assembly.
Yeah, I was on the road, and Nancy had actually called me and asked me what the answer was, so I related to Deacon Ackerman. So, okay, I thought I was under the impression she was in the meeting at the time. So, but again, it's always located in I believe it's the 3600 accounts. Sure. Pastor Caleb also has another question about our copier lease. Why is our copier lease so expensive? All right, one of the things that he said, well, you can go out and buy a copier for 10 grand and you'll be good to go. Well, that is true, except this 11,000 also comes with maintenance. So if there's any maintenance that's needed on the machine, they come out and take care of it. They also take care of supplies. We don't pay for the supplies for our copier if we're within the usage that was contracted for. So again, we don't have to pay for supplies. So if you go to Office Depot or Staples right now, and you were to buy even ink for your little inkjet printer, you're going to find that a little cartridge is going to cost you about $35. So when you're talking about a drum of toner, you're probably talking about $125 per drum of toner. And the Synod office does a significant amount of printing. The copier is used as a printer by all folks in the office. So again, while we have a large amount of numbers of copies we can use to make and print, that toner becomes expensive, as well as the maintenance on the duty cycle. So that's why we are going with a copier lease, as opposed to buying a brand new copier. Again, that one time is going to be cheaper, but as your copier ages, you're going to have to buy a new copier. As this copier ages, it'll be maintained, and then we just get a new copier at the end of its contract life.
Looking at the balance sheet, I'm in fund proceeds 3,300. Total is $7,009,391 for properties that have been sold. Is that correct?
Yes, potentially.
Okay.
I don't have that in front of me, so.
There's not another place that it would have that information. I mean, there's a number up ahead.
Are you talking about for mission and ministry specifically, or
I'm
just in
talking
general?
about in the balance sheet of the bishop as of January 31st, 2024.
Okay.
It's showing proceeds as a category on the balance sheet. It lists Van Nuys, North Hollywood, Pasadena, and Chatsworth. So we have, those are 4 properties, and we have $7,009,391 in that amount of funds, correct?
Sure.
I mean, that's where I
Yes,
would look.
yeah,
That's
yes.
where I would look to see
Yeah,
what money
yes,
we have from
yes,
sales of property.
yes.
And I would like to make a point to anyone here that 3 of those properties were in the Twin Valleys Conference. And the 4th one was in the Foothills Conference. So I don't see any other proceeds from properties in other parts of the Synod that have been liquidated so far.
No, not since we started doing accounting this way. If you look back at the history of the Synod, these are not the only properties that the Synod has sold.
Well, and the FLOF
So-
fund obviously was the proceeds of the sale of First Los Angeles. We get that.
Yes, exactly. So First Lutheran Los Angeles was one of the sales. I believe Good Shepherd out in the San Gabriel Conference was another one. We do, it's a little complicated, but another property that was sold was Faith in Long Beach. There's a lot of backstory on that, but that does not show up in our balance sheet, but will be at probably sometime at the end of this year as a sale. So again, you know, there's building sales that will be happening, that will happen all over the place. So.
Right. So just to be clear then, we have proceeds in the FLOF fund from the sale of First Los Angeles, and
Yes.
other things may have over the years, as I recall
Yes.
from hearing storytelling, been put into that capital to keep feeding the capital.
That would actually be, if you really want to know where the money from previous property sales are, look at Mission and Ministry Fund. Because that's where all that money came from, was on previous property sales from that the Synod, of gifts that the Synod had received.
So one of the things that has come up this year for the Evangelical Outreach Mission Team is that they are, by constitution, advisory to the Synod Council on how proceeds of property sales should be used for new mission. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay, so this $7 million is part of what they could look at for new ministry.
Not all of it. So when you're looking at that part of the balance sheet, you need to look at the very last line in each of those groups. So it's the, I'm going to say that it's the...
The two-thirds.
The two-thirds, correct.
Okay, so I'm just asking because
Yes.
when the EOMT was asked to evaluate a proposal recently, and they did recommend it to the Synod Council after hearing some of the discussion about property sales and the amount that we thought was in the fund, it was somewhere, these are not beyond the realm of what they were talking about, but they did not have numbers on what was in that fund and what they were supposed to be recommending on. And they also did not know how much they might be able to recommend for future ministries as they come through requesting consideration.
Well, I mean, anybody that is on the Synod Council and is part of EOMT would have that information to them.
But they
So,
didn't have it when they would.
You know, I unfortunately, if the committee is not asking me or asking accounting, I can't guess what they're going to want
Right,
or not
I'm just
want.
saying
I don't
that-
sit in their group.
That
so.
there are council members who had no idea where to find it. That was my only concern.
And again, while I've gone over the accounting several times, I mean, I have had trainings, I have done all kinds of things. So unless somebody is asking me the specific question of where can I find this, and I can say, look here.
You'll get an email
Yeah.
and a text from me. I will make sure before we have that discussion
Right.
again, we ask that question.
All right, yeah, because I can't answer the questions I don't have.
Right, they
I
just
don't have.
didn't know where to find
So,
it, had no idea
it-
what it was and all of that stuff, and yet it had been passed to them to handle that as a constitutional requirement.
Well, it's part of them to be an advisory body.
Right.
It's not them to distribute all of that money. So-
Agreed, understood.
Yeah.
They don't have the power to distribute that. They only work on the money for the new starts and special ministries and strategic ministries as a recommendation for what the Synod should fund and the ELCA.
Correct.
But they were being asked to look at how would we use the proceeds from property sales for new ministries, that proposals were coming forward because congregations are looking at working together and collaboratively to do new ministries together.
Right.
And they were not certain how much money that we were talking about compared to the ask that was coming through. It was a significant magnitude of money more that there is available in these funds than they were being asked to consider at that point. So that was what they came to the conclusion of.
Yes, yes.
Part of the basis upon which they recommended that application to the Synod Council for approval.
Sure, and again, just because you ask for a certain amount of money doesn't necessarily mean that that will be granted or that the Synod Council will feel differently about it. Ultimately, is the responsibility of the Synod Council to take action on those recommendations. So just as the evangelical team for the mission team for evangelical outreach is responsible for looking at the First Lutheran Los Angeles Fund and making its recommendations on what to fund from that, ultimately it's the Synod Council that has to actually make the expenditure. Sure. Pastor Marge. Yes, every time there's we put out a balance sheet every council meeting. So if you could go back to any council meeting, you will have this document available to you. Come on, guys. I know you got some hard questions out there. I'll let you know that people wonder who sits on budget and finance because this is not a group that is elected. It is a group that is mostly appointed or volunteered for. We do have a budget and finance person sitting amongst us, and I would like to recognize Pastor Rick Hall as one of our folks. We also have Aaron Pauley, who is a member of Shepherd of the Valley in Simi Valley. We have David Haxton, who is a member of Lutheran Church in the Foothills. We also have Dr. Jim Gilbert, who is actually outside of our synod and serves on an advisory role. But David Haxton and Dr. Gilbert are two people that served as synod treasurers. So they're quite familiar with the history, the finances of the synod, and also have a great understanding for how the governance works. And the two of those gentlemen are responsible for writing some of the governance that we have in our Constitution today when it comes to finances. So there's those two individuals. We also have Deacon Nancy Ackerman, who served on Synod Council, who served as an assistant to the bishop to Bishop Nelson, and is the CEO of California Lutheran Homes. We also have, Robert Chillison is also in the room with us. So please recognize Robert Chillison as a member of our group. He's in the back. He's another person who has a multitude of years in banking, as well as years serving in the Mission Investment Fund, serving on their board of directors, serving on the board of directors for California Lutheran Homes. We also have the bishop who sits on our committee. We have Fernando Russo, the Director of Budget and Finance, who also who sits on the committee and has voice. So we have a group of people in our Budget and Finance Committee that are really, Wolf, I can't think of his, Wolf Heim. He's a member of Synod Council who also sits on Budget and Finance. So we have a great group of people who are really tied into the finances and the financial world to be able to give us some great advice on trying to make this look the way it does and to keep the Synod functioning in a way that is meaningful to our congregations. So, so if you see these folks hanging around sometime, please say thank you to them. They serve an invaluable role in our Synod, and I find their advice to be immensely needed. So the people like to look at the treasurer. I am not the smartest man in the room. I just happen to be the voice of a group of people who happen to be the smartest people in the room. So. Any other questions about the budget for this year? Anybody potentially having any more questions for this session? All right, Pastor Marcia, you do not disappoint.
Here she is again. Okay. Hallelujah. Okay, so I did find the section in the balance sheet where the mission and ministry discretionary endowment section is.
Okay.
Just to, hang on a second, that's the bishop's section. Hold on a second. There we go. The regular mission and ministry endowment, there's a gain loss, there is an endowment other, and then there's a total, and then there's a disbursement that was given out in that year, and then the new total. Which piece would tell us how much is available?
Sorry, actually, you know what, let me rephrase that. If you go up to the top of our balance sheet, okay, and you go up to the 1,000 accounts, that's the account that actually holds the available funds.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yes,
that's okay.
That is where that's going to be.
Okay, I'm looking to find it really quickly because I don't want to keep everybody waiting till I get this question answered. But it's the Warner Trust discretion.
It's going to be right. It should be right above that, and it'll say M&M, I think.
Mission and Ministry 2612 and the 1002.14 as to what's available in the ACCU cash accounts restricted.
Yep.
Okay, so that says that Mission and Ministry can this year disperse 237,000 and some change, and that Warner Trust can disperse 16,400 and some change.
That is correct.
Thank you very much. That is very helpful.
You are very welcome. I try to be helpful when I can. All right. If anybody doesn't have any more questions, Tom, have there been any questions on Zoom? Nope. All right. Well, in that case, I'd like to thank you all for being here and being willing to listen to the spiel and listen to the questions. Thank you, Pastor Marcia, for your questions. I do appreciate them. So, and I don't mind. You can come up to the microphone as many times as you'd like. I'm fine with that. So, and thank you, Pastor Seaver, for your questions as well. I hope you'll all be here tomorrow. We will be officially presenting this budget tomorrow and voting on it. There will be a time of discussion after it is moved onto the floor. So you will have another opportunity to ask further questions or make further comments as you see fit. But I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, and have a very nice evening tonight. Thank you so much.